A short story titled I Believe in Myself by Samuel Horton, narrative designer, in Bright Star Studios. The year is 3214. The young man scaled the final step leading to the uppermost deck and stopped to catch his breath. Growing up on a mountain gave him an affinity to climbing, though these endless staircases and cruisers tested even him. After 10 hours of abusing his feet by walking on linoleum tiling, with the soles of his shoes missing, the hallway's soft red carpet was a welcoming sight. Enjoying the sensation of these new steps, he moved forward, glancing hopefully into the compartments. They appeared cozy enough, sans the territorial glances returned by the upper-class occupants. The young man's hope for finding a reprieve from economy-class voyaging nearly ran its course, until he found one unoccupied compartment at the end of the hallway. No sooner had the young man entered through the automated sliding door that he came to a halt. Never in his 19 years had he, a long-haired vagrant in ratty clothes, felt so out of place as he did in this compartment. It came loaded with a full bar featuring liquors fermented on every inhabited world across the solar system. The seats were cream-colored and comprised of rich leather that accentuated their curves and firmness. Most striking, however, was the navy blue carpet, featuring the golden seal of Pangaea. The young man walked to a seat directly next to the window and lowered himself down. He leaned his neck against the cushion and savored the soft and chilling sensation. He looked out the window, which provided an excellent vantage of cruisers and ferries, while smaller craft maneuvered in between. "Mr. Governor, you keep looking better and better," a booming, jovial voice sounded. Startled, the young man jumped to his feet to see a middle-aged man, bearded with long, frizzy blonde hair, grinning at him from the doorway with a sub sandwich in hand. He was, however, accompanied by a younger, taller companion with jet-black hair who intensively eyeballed this vagrant traveler. A guard wearing all black forced himself into the room. "Apologies, Mr. Governor. All right, kid, fun's over. Back to economy class with you. Off you go," the guard ordered, ushering with his thumb. "Easy there, Weiser," the governor said, motioning with his fingers. "We will otherwise never know what we would have missed." Weiser licked his lips in frustration and turned halfway, reluctant to break eye contact with the young man. He stumped past his superiors and rounded the corner. The governor looked back and smiled at the young man while making his way into the room, with his companion following close behind. The two men seated themselves around the young man, with the governor across from him and the other to his immediate left. With a reassuring nod from the governor, the young man took his seat. "Our fashionable friend out there is not so much in the business of earning constituents. You, on the other hand, are our intruder of honor. This is Dr. Alistair Burkholder, director of the Nicholson Astronomical Foundation," the governor said, motioning towards his companion. "And I am Colonial Governor Bo Abel of Ganymede. A sandwich?" "I'm set, thank you," the young man replied. "Arch Claudius." "I would have guessed a name like that, hailing from Mars and all," Abel said, nodding at a metal band lining Claudius's collar. "I recognize a tropospheric compensator anywhere, having seen millions strapped to high-altitude passes, growing up in New Dalles at the base of Olympus Mons. Arch Claudius. Where all the K's and Y's meshed together with our patchwork naming convention. Though, who are we to talk, Dr. Burkholder?" "All Martian, yet esoteric at best," Burkholder mused, holding out his canteen. Abel smiled and reached his sandwich out. They tapped their food and drinks in cheers, followed by the two of them eating and drinking, respectively. Burkholder looked at Claudius, a gulped. "Just prior to dinner, I reacquainted Bo here with a theory, tumbling us down quite the rabbit hole. opposite from the anodyne riddle of why there are disparities between Mars and Io, the Bergholder proclaimed as he took another swig from his canteen. Alistair, Abel spoke, holding a wrist up to hide the mouthful of food. Doesn't it look like the lad suffered enough without you murdering him with boredom before we even reached the damn moon? People are so concerned about being offended, when we don't even have a beginning pinpointed serving such nostalgic celery, Bergholder exclaimed, glaring between Abel and Claudius. We are so perturbed by the differences between the humans from Io and the ones from Mars, once vastly different cultures, hundreds of years apart in most every regard, as if one was sired and the other was, well, prodigal. Yet behold, one species on two worlds with no beginning. Yet I believe the nature of our genesis is akin to today's destination. You believe we're from Phanabus? Claudius asked. I said akin, didn't I? No, I believe we're not from Mars, Io, or even any dot we can see in the night sky. For that matter, like Phanabus, we are from another place, lost to either space or time, Bergholder said, staring out the window. That's not what my father believes, Claudius declared, monitoring Bergholder's visible disappointment. He believes that because the solar system is composed of the same 118 elements, humans arising on different worlds was inevitable. That we were maybe a little different at first, but years of breeding brought us to a middle ground. Your father sounds exceptional, Bergholder trailed off, catching a subtle headshake from Abel. Bergholder leaned forward and rubbed his nose and eyebrows with one hand, eager to brush away whatever IQ diminishing contagions Claudius may have been carrying. He looked back at Claudius with a plastic smile. What else? He also doubts the truth behind our trajectory. It does challenge credulity, doesn't it? We direct 30 generations of effort into supposedly terraforming Ganymede, yet a measly 15 of shooting particulates into Phanabus turns it into a jungle. You have to think, Claudius exclaimed, pointing at his head. Arch? Claudius looked at Abel, who had a finger subtly pointing towards the window. Claudius followed it, and his jaw dropped. At the forefront was Ganymede, partially covered in an atmosphere of grey clouds. Outstanding flashes permeated across the moon as lightning discharged from the energy dispersed, moving ominously through the skies, violently ejecting particulates and raking clouds with great hook-like appendages, were skydust. From the face of Ganymede alone, Claudius could count no less than 6 of these great machines, resembling arachnids. The dark patch just south of equator, that's Nicholson's region, Bergholder solemnly pointed out. It is where we will operate from, make no mistake. Phanabus is fascinating, yet Ganymede remains the end game, and we will relocate the colony there once the process is completed. Claudius turned toward Bergholder, only to see his rope rip around the corner as he exited into the hallway. Claudius looked sheepishly at Abel, who smiled back at him. A strong will may distinguish you, though it runs the risk of ruffling some feathers, Abel sighed. Hearing your father's belief is stimulating and uncomfortable, yet it would be remiss of me not to hear your own thoughts. You do, after all, have a functional brain, I'm led to believe. Unlike my father, who dwells on what might not be seen, I believe in only what I see. What I believe in now is Ganymede. You believe in the concrete, Abel said with a nod. It enables you to trust the things you know. Yet you know so very little, and therefore you trust so little. Unlike your father, who is a conspiracy theorist, a sufferable man, I'm sure, you are a skeptic. When you see a mountain, you can't fully believe it has another side. Claudius shared an intense stare with Abel. He had always hated being analyzed while growing up, so he held those who deciphered his ethos in the highest contempt, for they made him feel vulnerable. However, from this budding respect blossoming between Abel and himself, Claudius foresaw it becoming a mutual understanding, perhaps even the beginning of a friendship. He wanted to be able to read people too, so he could know how to be unreadable himself. He wanted to learn what it meant to lead, so that he, too, could see others in that very position. Abel looked out the window and asked, "What else do you believe in, Arch?" Claudius followed Abel's gaze once more. A moon, noticeable smaller than Ganymede, emerged from its tidally locked twin. Most of this world was covered in lush green, from copious amounts of flora, with serene blue seas and ample cloud coverage. A significant patch of terrain near its southern pole appeared yellow, a hot desert. Dots of light were already scattered throughout the forest in the northern hemisphere. Never in his life had Claudius seen a world so majestic and untapped as Phanobus. "I believe in myself," Claudius answered. Year 3216. Accompanying today's ribbon cutting, I am pleased to announce that Governor Abel has authorized the immediate utilization of Apsis Observatory for continuing our search for extraterrestrial intelligence efforts. Our first point of interest is KIC 846285, or as we like to call it, the What the Fuck Star. Burkholder chuckled, with a few others joining him. "I will be taking questions now." Claudius pinched his fingers together, causing the perspective of Burkholder's press conference on the holographic table to zoom out. It was a humble spectacle. The squat Apsis Observatory standing behind Burkholder, with 20 or so journalists gathered. Even with the scene being caked in a pixelated blue hue, the observatory had an overt copper luster, an archaic design, with its opulence outweighing its humility. Dr. Burkholder, why was Eastern Edison designated for this project?" a red-haired journalist asked. "You mean Solarwood?" Sure. Wouldn't something closer to Anchorage have been more convenient? Or perhaps a dry climate closer to the equator, say, northern Duscaran?" Thank you, Shell. Anchorage is the capital. Everything's caked in light, and Pangaea has yet to withdraw the Skyder. Nobody is seeing past that beast. Though deserts are typically ideal for observatories, Duscaran's become somewhat of a de facto trade route. We didn't want to get bogged down by potential disruption from freighters or synthetic assistance. But zoning is minimal and light pollution is non-existent here. As such, it is where the Nicholson Astronomical Foundation makes its stand, Burkholder proclaimed, as he simultaneously pointed at a blonde-haired young man. About KIC 846285. Don't you feel like that well's run dry? It's a unique anomaly that could be anything, but it was first observed in 953 years ago, with no response to date. Isn't it time we looked elsewhere? The journalist asked. Magnus, if it ran dry, then why doesn't it continue onward after 1,000 years? Burkholder retorted. Click. With the press of a button, the projection dissolved. Claudius picked up his own glass of scotch and took a sip as he paced around the circular table, passing Abel, who idly swished around the contents of his own glass. Claudius had come to model his appearance after his employer, from the fine maroon dress coat to the frivolous, purely ornamental gold amenities worn around his person. You wear tension well, kid, but sometimes you're all nods, Abel said. His chuckle echoed in his glass as he took a swig of scotch. Surprised? Claudius bitterly retorted as he made his way toward the governor's bookshelf. Nobody surprises me anymore. When you reach 55 and your life is politicking, those seemingly novel tricks and eccentricities you look for in your subordinates become as mundane as the sound of the sky, Abel said. I do know and have taken into account your perspective on Alistair's initiative. Then my words are falling trees in an empty forest, Claudius spoke coldly. It's not part of the unknown, it's the epitome of it. When Io made contact with Mars over 1,000 years ago, the red planet was puritanical, a Stone Age nightmare of superstitions. eons behind. What do you think we will be when it's our turn? Would you mind talking to my face and not to my tax law manuals? Abel sardonically insisted, prompting Claudius to sluggishly turn back toward him. Let's pretend like I'm the colonial governor. I would patriotically understand that the reason the government works is because it follows a stable system of inclusivity and globalism. Despite tens of millions of miles between us, our worlds have no boundaries, no descent, and no limit to what can be achieved. This tradition brought the first worlds together, and it is what we are doing now with Apsis Observatory. That's what history books say. Indeed, Governor. The widest interpretation. But look closer to that space in between the letters, and you begin to see something else entirely. You see the family life which Claudius trailed off. A disheveled home, little more than a shack. A man in his briefs, making a crack in the screen. It's humans are natural warriors. No matter how silly we make ourselves, under a one-world government, with not even the inkling of a threat to entice our true calling, our spears start pointing inward. One fist to the eye socket, one bottle to the scalp. The cracks form at the smallest, most delicate level. The family. Warm blood making the carpet sticky. Cracks are appearing before my very eyes. Abel worriedly spoke as he eyeballed his protege from head to toe. This pathos lies before me and behind you, so how would you save us? Claudius walked up to the table and pressed the button. The hologram of Burkholder's press conference covered the surface once more. Claudius held out a hand and pinched his fingers, causing the image to zoom out further and further. He repeated this process until the entire moon hung over the table, with specks representing ships moving around it. Claudius leaned onto the table and nodded. This moon is a blessed one, unlike any other, and with the ingredients of its own lifeblood embedded in the very crust. It became in 15 years what Ganymede could not in almost 1,000. We have a healthy society here, with just enough technology and connection with the rest of humankind. Plus, we have a Skyder, which can produce all the ore under the sun. Claudius nodded as he looked at Abel. We have everything we need. Abel lifted his scotch glass to his lips and slipped an ice cube into his mouth. Chewing furiously, he set the glass down and walked around the table until he was directly next to Claudius. He continued chewing and silently challenging Claudius until the younger man's discomfort piqued and caused him to look away like an insolent pup. Abel swallowed and let out an exasperated exhale. Phanibus isn't your birthright, Archie. This world didn't just happen. It was only thanks to Pangean research and the efforts of men like Alistair, whom you have regularly disrespected, that we are here. It is because of the efforts of myself that you have a job, a home, and colleagues who treat you like family. It is the steed of whatever warped, disaffected military brat upbringing you simultaneously dangle in my face while dodging around. Abel shouted. He slammed his hand onto the control console, causing the hologram to dissipate with an unappealing whir. I swear on your life. Poison these grounds with your unhinged rhetoric again, and I'll have you scraping brown eyes off outhouses on Pluto. It's year 3220. It's now crossed Saturn's orbital path and is headed straight for us. Burkholder wailed over the transmission. Abel slammed his spotted, calloused fist down on the edge of the table, causing the various holograms to waver. You are our eyes, not our mouth. Forward me the damned feeds. Bergholder's pixelated image nodded, followed by a dozen camera feeds from Thanabus's high orbit, populating the space above the holographic table. Abel craned his head as he stepped back, while the orbital images above focused in on a bright white point. Another 24 muted portraits of talking heads angrily shouted over one another. Abel took another step back, bumping into Claudius. He turned around and stared at him. Arch, I could use my heart medication. Owen, could you? You know. Abel nervously asked. Claudius stiffly made his way past the holographic table and slapped the console, causing the room to be filled with loud shouts, including phrases, unprofessional, impeachment, and what the fuck star. As Abel feebly attempted to address his political lion's pit, Claudius squeezed past 2 of dozens of fellow staffers, packed into the room like sardines. He reached Abel's ornate desk and opened the top right top drawer, revealing a stash of brandy and cigars, along with the heart medication. It's almost to Jupiter now. First of all, what the bloody hell is it? And why didn't I hear about it until 15 bloody minutes ago? Pluto Command here, Prime Minister. We initially detected the interstellar object 18 minutes ago. We believe we captured this image, though it's unclear. It resembles neither an artificial object nor a meteor. Its size, it was estimated to be quarter the size of Thanabus. Admiral, the fleet, the Prime Minister demanded. Deployed, Mr. Prime Minister. Unfortunately, interception is 2 hours away. A gruff voice spoke out. I don't think it will be interstellar for long, Bergholder's familiar voice squeaked. It's slowing down and has entered Galilean orbit. With Abel's pills in hand, Claudius turned back toward the table. Abel and the staff converged on it as one orbital perspective aimed at Jupiter's horizon was maximized. Claudius walked toward the group and pushed his way to Abel. He held his hand out in front of his face, but Abel opted to stare dumbly at the image. Claudius turned his attention back toward the hologram. A massive onyx-colored planetoid emerged from beyond Jupiter's horizon. The entire surface was covered in an organized formation of yellow lights, an enveloping metropolitan civilization. Lacking discernible engines, the planetoid moved in a fluid, sentient manner, uninterrupted by Jupiter's gravity well. It headed toward the holographic table's perspective, gradually engulfing the entire viewport. The holographic table made a ghastly ever noise, prompting a nearby aide to smack the power button. The electricity to the entire governor's mansion went out. As the staff murmured in fear and confusion, Claudius noticed the vanishing of the golden late afternoon light through the terrace window. He walked to the window and stared out, to see all the lights of Anchorage out, and the planetoid eclipsing the very sun. It was a haunting and awe-inspiring sight, seeing Jupiter and the mere ring of the blackout sun, while the silhouette of Skydar hung over the unpowered capital. Claudius grabbed the handle of the door leading outside and turned it. He led a procession of staff who silently filled up the terrace. Abel slid in between staffers who paid no special attention to him. He made his way to Claudius near the front. Reaching the edge of the terrace, Abel grabbed the handrail and looked up at his young protege, who remained transfixed on this monumental event.
Look skyward.
A deep, melodious voice filled the atmosphere, sending tremors everywhere. People on the terrace and down below screamed as they flinched and brought their hands up towards their heads. The voice was a godlike shout that permeated all, yet still had the unsettling sensation from an autonomous sensory meridian response, like an insect buzzing around the ear canal.
I am Starson, protector of the existence, ascended through the course of eternity. For millennia, I have sought to suppress the rising threat, an unmitigated madness whose thirst for power is matched only by a disregard for the fabric of the universe. Ascent, lost an age ago, I found it again when I heard your negligent transmissions. Alas, you are answered. I come here as the harbinger of the danger you face, wielding the might of the Ember sword. A weapon channeling the very energies of the deepest pits of space-time itself. Here I shall remain until the threat is unmade.
The voice went silent, and the rumbling stopped. People across the solar system stood up and stared in horror. People everywhere staggered and clutched at their bodies, suddenly uncomfortable in their skins and burdened by existential crisis. Claudius noticed Abel from the corner of his eye, putting his old hands over his eyes and beginning to weep in guilt-ridden moans. The senior citizen had opened the door and called for sheep, blindly ignorant to the wolves he had invited for dinner. Never in his life, not even while under the belt and boot of his father, had he hated a man so dearly, so very dearly. Years 3225. The perfume from the freshly baked bread protruding from the paper bag, mixed with the moist forest air of Ediso, was delightful for Claudius. The grade leading to the governor's mansion was not steep enough to make the mile-long journey from his apartment strenuous, yet it did make his newer, added stop to the artisan bakery all the more rewarding. Mundane details like arriving at work half an hour early, flirting with the attractive young baker, and enjoying her fresh spreads distracted Claudius enough that he could overlook the impotency he felt in the face of humanity's jaded relations with existence itself. The few other people up at the early hour murmured and pointed at the starry morning sky. Claudius followed suit to see Starson crossing in front of Ganymede. Something was different this time. The array of lights across Starson's planetoid body lit up in designated formations, as if he were signaling a challenge. Never had Starson communicated in such a manner. He had largely been silent, as he ominously wandered world to world. Starson halted, and his lights went dark. People dressed in bathrobes and pajamas opened their doors and windows to see the phenomenon. They wandered into the street around Claudius to get a better view. The lights on one end of Starson's planetoid began glowing blue, intensifying and spreading. The colossal image of a featureless humanoid made of pure light rose from the section of the planetoid, wielding a sword. An array of glyphs appeared around Starson, orbiting the planetoid. "Is that what Starson looked like? I thought he was the whole planet, with all the creatures on it. Is that the Ember sword?" The figure pointed the sword above its head, and the planetoid accelerated forward. Starson picked up speed as he moved past Ganymede's horizon, and came into the same field of vision as the red spot of Jupiter. The figure swung its sword around and pointed it at the great red spot. A horrific beam of yellow energy blasted from the sword and penetrated the clouds of Jupiter. A gargantuan shockwave spread across the planet, wiping the great red spot away. Hundreds of thousands of other beams shot from the lights across Starson's surface, all converging on the same location, burning the planet's atmosphere. "Starson's attacking! He's gonna kill us all!" The crowd went berserk and broke off, with people screaming and fleeing in every direction. Claudius gazed around, with a scarce few remaining grounded. Starson shuddered as his beams impaling the planet appeared to produce blowback in the form of nebulous bursts traveling back toward him. A wayward burst of energy grazed his planetoid, sending a mountain-sized chunk into space. 5 years. We had 5 years to prepare. Where the hell are our defenses? A man in a hard hat bellowed. Above us! A woman holding a toddler pointed at the sky. A disappointed Claudius recognized her as being Thomason, the baker behind his favorite morning breads. A conglomerate of warships, frigates, cutters, carriers, crossed above Phanobus's upper atmosphere en route toward Jupiter. This was no mere convoy. This was the sum total of the Pangean Space Force, strategically positioned between the Galilean moons, specifically for the special kind of day. Many of the panicking people noticed the fleet and came to a halt. Screams became supportive cheers as the ships closed in on Starson. "Those cutters are the new mountain buster freighters, made for busting planet-sized terrorist balls. Those are monsters, I tell you. Monsters, baby!" A bespectacled young man shouted excitedly as he took his place next to Thomason, wrapping his arm around his shoulder. Fighters poured out of the carriers like a swarm of locusts and descended upon Starson, firing energy bolts en masse, lighting up his planetoid surface. The warships unleashed their own barrage, a cacophony of beams and hydrogen-tipped missiles. The impacts were horrific. Starson jerked around in agony, as mushroom clouds formed everywhere and cracks formed across his world's surface, exposing magma. The crowd cheered as the images of the figure and glyphs flickered.
Stop!
Starson's horrible, invasive voice bellowed everywhere.
You do not understand anything.
"Yeah, we're just too stupid. Us plebeian sheep. Pangea lives. Send him back to hell, boys." The man in the hard hat shouted. The barrage continued, and soon the lights across Starson's surface flickered out of existence. The cracks in the planetoid fractured wider and wider, causing magma to erupt from the mantle into the cold of space. The beams leaving Starson faltered, though the kickback from Jupiter's impact grew more and more intense. Something phenomenal caught Claudius's eye. 6 white lights flew in line from beyond the hills of creation and zeroed in on Starson. "Did anyone else see that?" Claudius asked. Neither nobody heard him, nor cared. All the beams leaving and entering Starson's body ceased. His planetoid shuddered and splintered, with great swaths being injected in every direction. The fleet continued its bombardment, showing no quarter.
Take it.
Starson screamed. Starson's planetoid exploded in a horrible, nebulous blast. The people of Anchorage let out their most triumphant cheers yet. Fragments of the slain Starson burned white indents into the clouds of Jupiter as they penetrated the planet's upper layers. Chunks impacted the surrounding moons, causing shockwaves. Ganymede's partial atmosphere appeared to be blown away, with the many skyders exploding. Mountain-sized debris slammed into the fleet, turning the glorious ships into metallic vapor. Now they came barreling for Phanobus. Nobody was cheering. "Oh no, it's going to hit us! Run!" Everybody was running and screaming. Claudius sprinted as hard as he could down the hill, away from the governor's mansion. He heard horrific noises from above as rocks met the upper atmosphere. Thousands of meteorites began raining down, decimating swaths of the city and forest alike. Craters opened everywhere, eviscerating all in their paths. Claudius looked up as an unimaginable large fragment slowly crossed the sky and headed southward toward the untouched jungle of Severand. A screeching sound bellowed from behind Claudius. He turned to see holes punched into the skyline in short succession. The once dormant device started shooting gravity-distorting beams and mad particulates everywhere. With its stabilizers malfunctioning, it swung to and fro, turning the skyscraper beneath it to dust. The pressure changes were unbearable. Claudius clawed at its head, fearing it may explode. He stared at the skyline as it lost what little remained of its faculties and plummeted upside down towards the remnants of the city below. The impact sent a great shockwave that reached upward beyond the atmosphere. Dizzy and resigned to his fate, Claudius's eyes rolled into his head as he fell backwards into a great hot pit. He slid downward, with the last of what he saw being a curious little white light crossing his vision, before it was lost in the expanding impact cloud. Inhaling ash and dust, Claudius gagged hysterically. He opened his eyes to see his artisan bread toasted beyond edibility. There was a third-degree burn across his face, and breathing was like putting his mouth to a car's tailpipe. Ediso, which has always been a wet, mild ecosystem, was now utterly bone-chilling. Coming to his senses, Claudius could hear pained bellows, reminiscent of animals being eaten alive, but no, they were human, anguished, and beyond cognizance. Hacking and wheezing, Claudius brought his handkerchief to his face as he struggled to rise to his feet. Rickety at every joint, he staggered up the incline as he used his handkerchief to wipe away the blood and particles caking his face. It was a struggle to identify the world now, as a mixture of snow, ash, and dust had supplanted almost every identifiable landmark. The once pristine sky was now a hideous mixture of grey and brown, illuminated by violent bursts of lightning in the upper atmosphere. The few Edison trees were charred beyond burnability, skeletons of the once wondrous Edison forest. Anchorage skyline was non-existent. The colonial city was replaced by the crashed Skyder, its terraforming core bombastically spitting out particulates, though it was breathing its last breath. Then there was the governor's mansion. Upon seeing the caved-in remains of the residence, Claudius broke into the best hobbled sprint he could muster. He refused to process the visuals of his countrymen wandering the streets with arms missing, the charcoal-like skeletons lying on the sidewalks, the utter apocalypse the survivors were doomed to exist in. If Abel had survived, there was still a chance the colony could persevere and be rescued by Pangaea before anarchy would set in. The automated front door Claudius had entered through thousands of times was obstructed by a great pile of rocks. He took the scenic route by haphazardly crawling over the edge of the giant gash that vivisected the great structure. Inside, he found himself in an utter quagmire of rubble, with smashed masonry and boards splintered around Abel's prized art collection. Claudius squinted as he wiggled his way through the maze, doing his best to be undeterred by the sewage water spilling down from what remained of the second floor. "Governor, it's Arch. If you're here, please say something. Bo?" Claudius shouted. He spotted Abel lying in between several great rocks, smiling warmly at him. "Thank you, architect, who I told you was ripping you off on this joint." Claudius scrambled his way toward Abel. Claudius took a hold of Abel's hand, smiling at his mentor. He nodded at the governor as he grabbed his other hand, maintaining eye contact all the while. He began pulling. Abel's body moved very, very easily. We're getting out of here, Bo. We're getting out of... Oh my God!" Claudius screamed as gore spilled out from the bottom of Abel's body, now directly beneath the ribcage. Claudius released his deceased Boss's upper half and fell backward into a shadowed puddle of grey water. He kicked as he scooted himself away and to the wall. He stared wide-eyed at Abel's remains, tears filling his eyes. Bo? Claudius gasped. I wasn't right about everything. We won't last without you because I'm not ready to be you. Please don't leave me alone. An electric sound emanated from the darkness. Claudius frowned as he tried to make out the source. Between these mysterious bursts of energetic noise, Claudius heard a board drop. Narrowing his eyes, he spotted shadowy movement among the refuse. Is someone there? Hunched over and dressed in no more than emergency blankets from their homes, people converged on the governor's mansion. Not once during the past 11 years on Phanabus had the colonists needed their winter clothing in Edessa, for the humidity made unusual weather a non sequitur. Apart from the terrible noises trademarked by destroyed lungs, nobody could form words and were left mute. The best they could do was to look to the familiar, the authority, the government, in the face of having all that they knew stripped away. The automatic door jammed behind the rubble creaked, startling the crowd. The thick metal bent and contorted, with bowls tearing in half and falling out. The door crumpled as it was pulled inward, off its track and tossed aside. Emerging from the darkness was Claudius, a rocked, composed man in his prime. Claudius swiftly made his way up the pile of rock, shoving the great stones aside with ease. He stopped and stared down at his compatriots. The crowd was pitiful. People were either in the throes of anguish or traumatized beyond cognition. Many of the survivors grasped at injuries that ranged from broken limbs to shrapnel protruding from their tattered clothes. Claudius spotted Thomason. She was in perfect health, yet she may as well have been dead with how vacant her face was. Never before in the history of this universe have ears been so thoroughly wrought with trauma. But lend me yours now, Claudius shouted, his voice full of resolve. Survivors of Phanabus, I am Arch Claudius, aide to Governor Bo Abel, who is no longer of this world or any other. He is dead. Dead because, like the rest of Pangaea, he looked up at the stars so much that he forgot to keep his eyes on the ground where his feet were. So he fell, bringing Phanabus down with him. Let's test our governor's advice. Look up. What do you see? Claudius asked as he held his hands behind his back and began walking down the pile of rubble. The crowd looked upward. Do you see ships, friends, life? Is there even a sky? Where are your stars? Claudius stopped in the middle of the crowd and turned, taking extra care to linger with eye contact. The gathering continued to grow, with the tips of rifles emerging as stragglers from the Pangaean armed forces arrived. Claudius smiled warmly at a soldier standing near the forefront and patted him on the shoulder. What happened this morning may only be described as a catastrophe, Claudius said, eliciting agreeing murmurs from the crowd. We saw it all, the way our fleet crumbled. We have suffered tremendously, but we are still here. Until we know the truth, we must fend for ourselves. But what we do know is we can do anything. For we survived the mighty Starson. The crowd cheered. We are alive, and we are free from this tyranny. Never again will we suffer a stranger telling us what we cannot do. We will rebuild our society with an interim government adapted to repel the thoughtlessness that led us astray. The crowd's intermittent cheers became an ongoing affair as their spirits lifted. Follow me, and we will take refuge in our Skyder, as it brings warmth to Edison once more. Not as our tomb, but as our home. Our people will rise once more, not damned to rub shoulders with criminals ever again. As our dear little free thinkers to the east, surely with stars circling their heads. Claudius said with an eye roll, prompting jeers. I say, let's give them a hand. Even Bergholder's observatory is ours, for all of Fanibus is ours. The shout of support were now deafening. Believe in yourself, and believe in me. The people began shooting their rifles into the air. Believe in the Republic.